Welcome back, AP. All right, so coming at you, one of the most important flips of the year. All right, so we're going to be talking about several different things. Some of them I wrote on here, some of them I didn't, but let's go ahead and get into it so we don't waste too much time. We're going to pick up right off where we left off, in class on today. And of course this is due today, tomorrow, something like that. Again, if it's up a little late, I apologize. It's been a crazy day. Now, really quick though, let's go ahead and pick up. So today we spent time talking about reviewing our models of the universe, reviewing Newton, reviewing the scientific revolutionary thinkers, right? Reviewing Descartes, reviewing Pascal's wager, and reviewing kind of all of these ideas about the mind, understanding the world around us. Then we got into medicine and science and chemistry. We talked about alchemy for a hot second, kind of how that was the old outdated thing, but even Newton himself was obsessed with this concept of alchemy, of trying to turn lead into gold, right? So now, interestingly enough, though, we then got into medicine, right? We talked about Andreas Vesalius creating De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which is, of course, on the fabric of human beings, and it's an anatomy book, right? We talked about Galen, the Greek philosopher that actually thought that, of an ancient Greek philosopher that thought that the body was made up of its four fluids: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood, which explains bloodletting, which Molly so astutely made the connection to. Good tip of the cap, Molly Mange Pants, appreciate you. And then also, big thing as well, is we discussed William Harvey, the body, right, pumping, actually moving like blood throughout the body, right? Huge, big stuff. And then we continue forward, and another big one, two guys by the name of Robert Hooke, and then also Anton Leeuwenhoek, who apparently developed the very first microscopes, right? So some people are like, Mr. Terry, this doesn't seem that important. Well, I like this a lot, mainly because of the debate, right? So the earliest debates about the microscope all come down to who actually made the daggum thing, right? Who actually developed it very first. And from what historians can tell, Leeuwenhoek probably made his first, but Hooke has had a better design, all right? So to just give you an understanding, this right here is the Robert Hooke microscope, okay? So the microscope that Robert Hooke used looks a lot more like the modern idea of a microscope, or what you believe a microscope would look like, right? Actually, we have a microscope, we have a slide down here, a light being provided by this candle to see the specimen and being able to magnify it about 3 to 4 times, right? Actually being able to see it a little bit closer, a little bit more in depth, a little bit more intensely, right? About 3 to 4 times, some of them being at most about 10 to 20 times the human eye, right? So, and also this is of course going to use some of the lens technologies that Galileo used to enhance the view of the actual specimen, right? Now, on the flip side, oh, wait, no, that's Doomsday Book. On the flip side, you had Leeuwenhoek's design, which is much simpler, all right? So this is why a lot of historians believe Leeuwenhoek, Anton Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch scientist, came up with the microscope before Robert Hooke, an English scientist, actually did. Leeuwenhoek's was much simpler, and it looked more like a ping pong paddle, and you would actually take the specimen and put it right here on a slide, and this little eye hole right here, you'd be looking through it with the other side. It was like a handheld thing. You'd literally be like this, and you'd just be looking through there. And Leeuwenhoek's big thing is he looked at slides of pond scum, right? So he looked at slides of pond scum, and he actually is believed to have seen small microorganisms moving around inside that pond scum, okay? He also apparently looked at a lot of other stuff, which we'll talk about in class. Just write it down in your notes. I don't want to talk about it on the internet. What else did he look at in Leeuwenhoek's microscope? But the cool thing about Robert Hooke's microscope is actually what he viewed, right? So Robert Hooke actually looked at animals, plants, certain cells, right? Let me make sure this is true. Hooke, cork, cells, right? Robert Hooke even also tried to expound on the idea of cells. He saw them in cork tissue, right? The slides of a cork from a wine bottle, think these wine bottle stops. This right here is a body louse, right? That is actually a lice, an actual specific louse, one specific lice critter that he found from somebody, put it under a slide, and he microanalyzed it and everything like that. But the cool thing about Robert Hooke was he integrated his artistic ability into what he saw in his microscope as well, and would actually draw these really amazing works inside of his journals. And I, to this day, have always thought, man, if I wasn't terrified of needles, I'd think about getting like a Robert Hooke like specimen tattooed on me somewhere. But I'm terrified of needles, can't do it. So like the big thing about it though, these are the big debates over who invented the first microscope. Leeuwenhoek, Robert Hooke. We think Leeuwenhoek's came first, but of course like Robert Hooke's was much more advanced, right? So now going forward though, now we're getting into the Enlightenment, right? So we're getting into the period where we're talking about political depth of knowledge changing, having a better understanding and a grappling of our government, where human rights play into this scientific era, and kind of using the ideas of the scientific revolution to analyze human nature, right? So now we're moving into the Enlightenment. Oh, such good stuff, right? Now, you do not need to draw this. You do not need to draw this. You can write this down if you want. Maybe you can take a screenshot of it, okay? Like, I'll even move myself away, like down here real fast, and I'll actually, like, tell you about it. So if you want to, you can take a screenshot. You can throw it into something. I know some of y'all are like, like note writers versus non, but it's okay. So this right here is like a simple timeline, so you can understand the cause and effect that the scientific revolution had when leading to the Enlightenment, okay? So to give you a heads up, we got a little timeline right here, right? So we got De Rev issued in 1543. The 30 Years' War culminating from 1618 to 1648. Just to give you an understanding, Galileo died in 1642. And I know some of y'all are like, wait a second, Mr. Terry. We're this close to the 1700s. This close, Mr. Terry, right down here. This close to getting to the 1700s because, like, I thought we talked about the 1700s at one point. Remember, this is European history. We are flying around time all the time, right? So the 30 Years' War happened, and Galileo actually died while the 30 Years' War was being fought. But he died, of course, in Italy, which was not a heavily fought over place. From 1642 to 1651, during the 30 Years' War as well, you have the English Civil War. Thomas Hobbes is going to publish the Leviathan, and Louis XIV is going to be crowned king in 1643, right? The Principia is actually published in 1687. So as you can see, the political climate post-Reformation in Europe, as well as the political climate of the attempt at absolutism by the English, are all intertwined into this scientific revolution, right? But then as we progress forward, we see the Enlightenment being almost a direct cause, or like the scientific revolution being like the cause of the Enlightenment, right? By 1690, Locke has issued his two treatises on government, where he outlines the ideas of life, liberty, property. Peter the Great leads his grand embassy tour in 1697, returns on it in 1698, right? Prussia is going to crown their first king in Frederick Wilhelm I. Actually, it's Frederick I. That's not right. Erase that, and it's Frederick I. By 1713, which is when he dies. And Louis XIV is going to die in 1715, right? So as we can see, these two movements are intertwined and have been going on in the background of everything we've been talking about leading to this point, right? The scientific revolution is almost like we're starting a new renaissance, right? It's like we're getting into a new renaissance period, and then the after effects, the shock waves of it, is going to be the Enlightenment. But then the Enlightenment is then going to lay the foundation for another crazy movement going forward, the era of revolutions, right? So because the Enlightenment directly causes things like the American Revolution and then the French Revolution, right? So, French Revolution, gotta love it. It's good stuff. Now, anyway, but what you need to understand is the Enlightenment is the intellectual and cultural movement of the late 17th and early 18th centuries, right? So we're talking about late 1600s getting into the 1700s, and it is going to be a groundbreaking moment because it's going to revolve around three key central concepts. Reason, right? Using rationalism to actually understand human nature, to try and take a step back and try to use logic to answer things that can't necessarily be answered by the scientific revolution, right? The thing about the scientific revolution that you got to understand is that it is being offered in under the idea and the guise of experimental models and observation, right? Well, some things can't be necessarily experimented on, quote unquote, right? And you're talking about things like human nature, styles of government, people's rights, people's abilities. the way people understand content, how they learn, right? Like, so the Enlightenment is going to take up where the scientific revolution leaves off and try to answer those questions using rationalism, trying to use something more like a Descartes model of understanding the world, right? So, but the scientific revolution is going to inspire the Enlightenment because it's going to increase this style of study of human nature, right? Observe it, try to wrap your mind around it, try to use and understand the qualities of people in the grand scheme of things. And also the Enlightenment is going to hinge upon one major thing: progress. How do we take what we have now and how do we make it better? Right? So like that is huge, okay? So the Enlightenment is all about making everything for everyone better, right? Because the Enlightenment is a very broad term, okay? And most of your Enlightenment thinkers focus on what they believed was being infringed upon. And that's people's rights, voices, fairness, natural laws, ideas, and economics, right? So like a lot of Enlightenment thinkers are trying to use reason, rationale, progress-minded scientific study of how to make the lives of the people being ruled better and how to protect them from their rulers, right? So the Enlightenment is a very broad term, okay? Some historians argue, like the Renaissance, that it spanned over 100 years, okay? Some historians argue that it went from circa 1670 to 1789, right? So, and before we can get started on our big dog Enlightenment thinkers, you always got to talk about some of our JV Enlightenment thinkers, right? Because the Enlightenment, really, the ball got rolling on it, some argue, as early as the 1640s. And one of the biggest ones, or biggest things that could have caused this early Enlightenment thinking is the fact that it's a backlash of the 30 Years' War, right? And the scientific revolution. Because of the 30 Years' War and because of the scientific revolution, it has now been paving the way and to actually analyze these big questions and how the 30 Years' War caused so much chaos that in the wake of that insane war, people are going to begin to say, where does religion fall in my life? Why does my king decide my religion? Why should my king not be doing that, etc., 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 right? Now, the big thing, some of your early Enlightenment thinkers are going to be people like Baruch Spinoza, right? Now, some people argue that Spinoza is not that important. I do think he's pretty important because he's offering up differentiating opinions, right? So just so you understand, Baruch Spinoza is going to be one of our earliest Enlightenment thinkers. He's a good example of an early Enlightenment thinker. The big thing about him is he's going to kind of challenge the ideas of faith, right? And he's going to be doing this in the wake of that 30 Years' War, right? Where he's from, he is living in the Dutch Republic by this point, during their golden age, and it is at this point that he actually gets banished and excommunicated from the Jewish community there, right? So he was born Jewish, right? And he begins to read up on things like Descartes, right? He begins to read up on ideas expounded by Newton. He begins to read up on different ideas that are coming to the forefront of society. And he argues, or begins to argue, that following the scientific revolution in the 30 Years' War, that he believed that God was not like the Bible and the Talmud and the Torah symbolized him. Not this ever-present being, not this ever looming over you person-like object. He actually argued against Descartes, not that God gave you these innate qualities to reason with everything and that everything's separated. He argued that God is nature, right? He argued that God is like a force rather than a thing, right? So, and he changed this idea of perception, right? So Baruch Spinoza is going to kind of pioneer the ideas that God is actually existent everywhere, and that our perception of the things going on is our perception of God in a sense, right? He also began to argue the ideas that there's no such thing as good and evil, that it's all learned understanding perceptions of what society tells you is good or evil. These things are extremely radical, right? He's arguing against this idea of a very present godlike force, and this is going to freak so many people out that actually they excommunicate him from the Jewish community. So just to give you an understanding, that's a big deal. So you're seeing the seeds of the Enlightenment landed by people like Baruch Spinoza, and you're seeing the scientific revolution coming into more of a common day view. This right here is the cover of a traveler's magazine, or not even a magazine, but a traveler's pamphlet, and it literally is entitled People Observing the Stars, or it's actually talking about a man pointing to the stars that are going around, and the planets, which are all revolving around the sun. So the scientific revolution's idea, and this was released in 1689, so the scientific revolution ideas are now coming to the forefront. And people are starting to realize that the Bible says that there's a dome around the earth and that it's flat and all this stuff. So this is bringing back a renewed interest in this concept of skepticism, right? And skepticism is perfectly outlined in the saying of the Royal Society of London. It's the belief that you can take nothing for sure, that nothing you have been told your entire life is for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, right? And so this is going to draw upon old school thinkers, right? We got tons of skeptics that have existed throughout history. There were ancient and medieval skeptics. Skeptics include Plato, Aristotle, my all-time favorite, Diogenes, Cicero, Saint Augustine, right? There are all kinds of skeptics out there, right? And for the longest time, that disappeared, right? But following the scientific revolution and following the 30 Years' War, you're going to see skepticism come back. And this right here is one of the most famous skeptics of all time. It is Pierre Bayle, right? So Pierre Bayle was a famous skeptic who actually lived outside of France because he was a Huguenot, and he ran out of France completely because of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes by Louis XIV, right? So in this moment, he begins to write his book while he's living in exile, and I believe he was also in the Netherlands when he writes this book, and he calls it his Historical and Critical Dictionary, right? In 1697, he criticizes the religious turmoil of the age. He criticizes the idea that Catholics should not be fighting Protestants. They should just be allowing each other to live, right? He criticizes also he advocates for both sides. It's like, both of you are trying to worship God in your own way. Why should it matter this much? Stop trying to kill each other over it. And basically he's saying that assuming that we understand the other side or their faith is the thing that will destroy all of us, right? So basically he's saying, assume nothing, be told nothing. Argue it for yourself, go out, research it, and figure it out, right? So Pierre Bayle is showing that reemergence of skepticism, right? And so skepticism is a very key part of the Enlightenment, looking at nothing for what you think that it is, right? And also something you need to understand is that we've really already kind of started this Enlightenment process already, right? The Enlightenment process began a long time ago because the roots of the Enlightenment go all the way back to the English Civil War in the 1640s, going back to Hobbes and Locke, who are two keystone Enlightenment thinkers, and they're not even really included in the Enlightenment by some historians, right? Because they happen to actually release their works in 1640s and the 1660s, they are sometimes not even considered to be a prominent part, right? But as we know, Thomas Hobbes, of course, wrote the Leviathan, and John Locke wrote his two treatises on government, but also he wrote another book called On Human Understanding, right? Now, in Thomas Hobbes' book of his Leviathan, this is just a kind of a refresher, you don't need to write it down if you don't want to. In the Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes argues that humans are terrible, awful, disgusting, power-hungry people. And if they don't give up their rights to a strong, central, absolute leader, then they will destroy each other, right? And this is the first premise of the social contract, right? The idea that, oh, I'm giving you my rights so that you will keep me safe from myself, right? So that is, of course, espoused in Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Now, in John Locke's two treatises on Gov, we're going to see a little bit of a different approach. And he's going to say that all humans have natural rights, natural, inalienable rights that no ruler should be allowed to take from them, regardless of how terrible you think they are, Thomas. Now, the big thing about it is he says humans have the rights to life, liberty, and property. And even though they can be brutal, a government is meant to guide away those fears, right? To be a guide in trying to protect those rights from other people, right? Because John Locke argued that, yes, people can be terrible, but the government is not supposed to take these rights from you. They're supposed to protect those rights from other people, right? So it's kind of this interesting duality of the social contract. The social contract becomes a very, very important concept throughout the entire Enlightenment period. So it's big to understand that you know that there is give and take in this societal idea. And is this not the Enlightenment in and of a sense, right? This idea that we're trying to figure out what's the best way to be ruled, how to rule better, how to do it well, right? And then also, he's going to write another big one. And this is where the Enlightenment's going to kind of take a little bit of a skew, right? So we see the one road of the Enlightenment, right? The one road of the Enlightenment kind of has to do with like understanding and the perception of the political era, right? Spinoza is really kind of arguing more along the lines of like this existence of God and the concepts of God because of all the religious turmoil going on at the time, right? And he argues that God is not necessarily a being that wants you to advocate for him or go to war over him. He's like he's the nature of your perceptions, and that you are being blessed with like seeing a door in front of you right now, Malaya, actually as like bang, God has given you that gift of perception, right? So he argues that. So we've got this mainstream of the Enlightenment being the idea of like basically understanding. And basically what ends up happening is that stream starts diverting into other small rivers and turning into other things and begging the question like, well, what about learning? Well, what about proper ruling, right? And so the Enlightenment turns into this like delta going into an ocean of understanding, right? So one big thing that I like to focus on when I talk about the Enlightenment is how people learn, which is actually expounded upon in On Human Understanding by John Locke. And John Locke believes in this concept called tabula rasa, or tabula rosa, right? And that means blank slate. So John Locke is going to be the very first person to expand upon the idea, which is that everything we know of is from experience, and it has nothing to do with anything else. It has nothing to do with like the ideas of rationality, this or that. That he's saying basically that English people want a parliament because it's what they know and it's what they've observed, right? So he's saying that everything we know and everything that we learn as a person happens to us throughout our life, and that is how we learn. And we go from being a blank slate to that thing having written on it the experiences of our lives, and that's how we understand everything. This also goes against Descartes a little bit, right? So you're starting to argue the ideas of perception. Or do you believe in Spinoza? Do you believe in Locke? Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? And this is going to lead, all of these ideas are going to lead to the growth of this concept of a philosophe, right? And philosophe, or philosophe, is a very important idea that you need to understand, right? And you need to understand it in the terms of what they are, who they are, and where they're from, right? So really quickly, where do we think the center of the Enlightenment is, right? I need you to write that down. The center of the Enlightenment, okay? The high Enlightenment, the period where the Enlightenment really gets churning forward, following the foundations set by people like Spinoza, Bayle, Hobbes, and Locke, right? They lay that foundation of, here's our social contract theory on the government. Here's our understanding of how we learn. Here's our understanding of God. Here's our understanding of skepticism. Now that foundation has been laid and we can build a house on top of it, right? But the interesting idea is a philosophe is an Enlightenment thinker. But you need to understand that all these philosophers mainly came from one country, all right? So most of the Enlightenment is focused in one country. So really quickly, write this down. Focus of the Enlightenment was in, and then here's the thing. Who do you think, or what country is going to be the focus of the Enlightenment? If you guessed France, good job, right? So that is exactly right. The Philosophs are from France, right? They are French intellectuals that believe that they were lighting the world with their gifts of intelligence, right? So that is really important that we understand that the headquarters of the Enlightenment for a large part of this time is going to be headquartered in France, right? Like, parlez-vous français? Now, the big thing, though, is why, right? Why France? Why is France going to be the area? Well, the Philosophs are all coming from France due to the fact of several different reasons. And it's mainly because France was the international language of the elite, right? Look at our Peter the Great example. If you were elite, learned, and could understand anyone in French, that means that you had an idea, a main vein, an understanding that if you were talking diplomacy or government or learning or knowledge or whatever, you almost always were speaking French, right? So French is that international language of the elite. Also, they were the most populated country in all of Europe, right? And we talked about that in class a little bit, right? So they had like over 20 million people, and they were very, very large for the time. Some of you are like, 20 million, that's barely anybody. Well, for the time, it's really big, all right? So French citizens, though, also importantly enough, are not restrained by their absolutists as much, okay? Now, their absolutists did not want them writing books about how much they hated them or whatever, but at the same time, absolutists just did not necessarily care about like the intelligence growing during this time period, as seen by Louis when he actually funds the Academy of the Sciences, right? He wants intelligence to spread. They are signing off on that. The Enlightenment is going to be that byproduct of the scientific revolution. So if you're going to take that like funding of the sciences, you best be ready for people to be having writings about governments and understanding and learning and the nature of God and perception, right? So French philosophers, though, also sought to spread their word to the educated nobles, not necessarily the poor, right? And if you're the most populated and wealthy country at the time, then you can send massive amounts of information back and forth, right? And the big thing that we're going to see again, much like we talked about with Luther, is another big birth of the Republic of Letters, right? So the Enlightenment thinkers began to send letters back and forth to each other, having each other edit their ideas or look at their ideas in the form of manuscripts, right? So the next guy that we're about to talk about in about 2 seconds is actually a really, really important one because he sent manuscripts of several of his earliest works for other Enlightenment thinkers to read, study, and actually edit for him, right? So this Republic of Letters is going to allow the growth of these things. And why can the letters move so much faster? Because absolutists like Louis, Richelieu, the Louis XIII, Henry IV had increased the postal system and the number of print shops throughout all of Europe. Yes, Angelina. We got postal service, printing press, shotgunning their ideas all over the place, right? So with that, you're going to see some new Enlightenment thinkers pop up. And one of the biggest ones is Baron de Montesquieu. Charles Baron de Montesquieu, right? Now, big thing about it, though, he's going to mainly be active from about 1689 to about 1755, right? He is an avid historian, okay? Avid student, ladies' man. And by what I mean by ladies' man is, I'm being ironic, he's actually a big sexist. All right, so like, he's actually a huge jerk. He, in a way, was like, he thought that all women should be subservient to men and 100% matters, but at the same time, he thinks women should be involved in government positions because they're gentle and rational. So it's kind of like you're saying that you don't want women around, but you do want women around, right? So he also said, too, that women were contaminating governments because queens were closer to their kings than actually anybody else, and that women were running, like terrible women were running everything bad that happened behind a bad king, which I think is a bunch of garbage, all right? So he's kind of a jerk, he's kind of positive, he's kind of a hard one to really make it, talk about. But he's also a big political commentator, right? And this is actually seen in one of his earliest works called the Persian Letters, right? He wrote this story about these two Persians touring through Europe, actually seeing what's going on, and they're making a huge political commentary, right? They're like, look at them being so fancily dressed, look at all the poor people, look at all this stuff, look at all that. And he kind of discussed the political state of France through the eyes of foreigners, and this gave him the chance to be able to expand on those things, right? Also, just so you understand, he is very, very wealthy, right? He actually is a baron and an actual robe noble, yes. His father is actually his uncle was a robe noble that paid his way in and actually bought the nobility from Louis XIV, and they had a massive estate complex that he inherited because his uncle didn't have any kids, right? So, but he becomes the Baron de Montesquieu. And in the process of him having enough money to travel around and view different things, he ends up going to England multiple times. He goes to the Netherlands multiple times. And in that moment, he sees what he believes is the ideal form of government. And this is the important stuff. This is the important stuff. This stuff just gives us a better context of who he is, right? But this is the important stuff of what Baron de Montesquieu came up with. And he published his seminal work, The Spirit of Laws. And he published it anonymously, and he publishes it in 1748. Some of you are like, holy crap, we just jumped all the way into the 1700s? We did. That's how the Enlightenment works, man. These ideas need time to fruit, they need time to grow, they need time to get really active, right? But the Spirit of Laws is going to be published in 1748, and it's going to be published anonymously, right? So published anonymously because he did not want to take the heat from who was ruling at the time, because when he actually published this, the very, very young king of France was actually not even really that much in charge. It was much more the Parlement of France, right? That he actually advocated for. And the big thing that he advocated for was the separation of powers. He loved and lauded the English system of parliaments and elected representatives keeping absolutists in check, right? He argues against them because he believed, and also his ideas bring rise to the ideas of checks and balances. Write this down real quick. Parlements. That right there is the Parlements of France. Those are the byproduct of the intendant system set up by Cardinal Richelieu. The parlements were these little elected cabinets and little elected legislatures that were inside all the major counties of France, right? And they would actually enact public policy, right? And he believed that those things were the only things standing in the way of a bad absolutist completely destroying their people, right? And many people believe that that means that he was saying that he didn't like Louis XIV, but interestingly enough, Louis XIV brought so much wealth and prosperity to France that, like, I think everybody pretty much liked Louis XIV. Like, a guy we'll talk about tomorrow loved Louis XIV, and you would think that he hated Louis XIV, right? So, also, he added this book, because it was so revolutionary, advocating for the separation of powers, advocating against absolutism. It's going to be added to the index of banned books along with De Rev, because it's going to be criticized heavily in France. But the Brits loved it. Inside of some of his letters, he said, "I understand that the French hate my work, but those icy, stiff Northerners love the concepts of the spirit of laws," because he modeled it off of them, right? So, but that right there is Baron de Montesquieu. And tomorrow we are going to talk about my favorite Enlightenment thinker, Francois-Marie Arouet. And I can't wait to tell you about him. And we'll see you guys then. Y'all have a good one.